Well, defense. Critical race theory is only taught at the university level, which it is, but there are ways you can also teach a lesser form where kids can understand that race has affected America on a much lower level, like you did in education. So, but too many people, too many people run from the idea. No, we're not teaching critical race theory. Fine, teach something similar. LeBron James recently just described Boston Celtics fans as racist as fuck on his podcast called The Shop. Carolyn, what are your thoughts on this? Is he wrong?
The story's gone viral, and there have been a lot of articles. So I'm just going to stick to one that I read. He's not wrong. And I think every blurb that I read basically said, no, this is a fact. We have ample evidence to support that Boston sports fans are in fact racist. And there are lots and lots of players who really don't want to play there. In fact, Torrey Hunter said he had a clause that he would not get traded to Boston ever. So any contract that he signed, he's like, nope, I'm not getting traded to Boston. Won't do it. So this sentiment that LeBron James expressed has been said over and over again, right?
And they've had that reputation.
And they've had it forever.
Yep.
And it's 2022, and this is still a topic of conversation. So in the article that I read, it was like, yes, no, this is a fact, absolutely. And that was the first half of the article. But then the second half of the article,
and that's what we want to talk about.
I got a little frustrated because it was like, no, there's hope. It's okay. We're going to be fine. Boston is getting better. And the only thing that they pointed to was the fact that in 2021, they elected Michelle Wu, who is an Asian woman. Prior to 2021, Boston has only had white male mayors.
And with the exception of that interim mayor who was black, right? But she wasn't elected.
Right. So they've never elected anybody who wasn't a white man until 2021. So so the second half of the article is all, oh no, there's hope. But they only pointed to one thing. One election of one woman in 2021, and that's the only thing they could point to. And they didn't have any quotes from other sports figures who were like, no, I don't have a problem, or there was no real rebuttal, and there weren't any other solutions offered. It was just, there's hope, it's getting better. So what are some of the solutions? What can they do to move forward other than admit it? Which I think the Red Sox have. They've said,
the Red Sox have acknowledged this.
We do have a history of racism here, but there aren't any steps forward. I'm not seeing any call for change.
Well, so traditionally, I will say that when you hear somebody say that it's getting better, right? They say, well, it's getting better, it's hope. They need to point out what they're doing, like you just suggested, because generally this is a smoke screen to say, well, yeah, things are getting better, because this is a deflection. That's the word I'm looking for. Usually saying things are getting better is a deflection to not acknowledging the real issue. And Boston has had this reputation for, as long as I can remember, going back to the Lakers versus Celtics, there were racial tensions.
Robinson, like going all the way back.
Well, I mean, the whole league had issues when Jackie Robinson, this is the late 40s, but we're talking about in the 70s, the 80s, and they had prominent black athletes like Bill Russell and Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. They've had a significant amount of black athletes who've played there and done well there.
Right.
However, they still have this reputation. And what's frustrating for me hearing you describe the article and reading what I read about it is LeBron James got specific, beer thrown on him, being called the N-word over and over again. And these things are still happening. I don't know what's in the water in Boston. I don't know, because also what's frustrating is that they pointed out that they had a person of color as a mayor. Okay, that's. I think I have a black friend. That is pure deflection. I mean, and Donald Trump hired Ben Carson and Herman Cain, and we know that he's the most racist president that we've had in our lifetime. I think there's no disputing that. That's not disputable at this point. But to suggest that, oh, we've had a black president,
therefore we're no longer
racist, and to use that as a deflection is almost insulting. Now, I will say that on the lower levels of politics, electing black school board members or people of color in positions of power does help. However, that is not the end and be all solution. What else are you doing? I mean, Boston's had this reputation for years. I mean, The Daily Show even did something on it. I mean, that's how, I mean, they pointed out that this city has a reputation, and for a reason, of being racist and hostile toward African Americans specifically, and other groups. I mean, so
what are specific actions that can be taken in order to help alleviate or ameliorate this issue?
The first thing that needs to be done is you need to attack schools. I don't mean attack literally. I mean attack schools with education. You need to put people in power who are willing to talk about the issues, and there also needs to be consequences. Like, for instance, in Salt Lake City, Russell Westbrook, a few years ago, there was a jazz fan who had said some racial charged things toward Russell Westbrook, and they banned him for life. They banned that fan for life. That's things like that. That's what needs to happen. There needs to be consequences. There needs to be education. There needs to be ongoing discussions, not just a one-time discussion. Not just, oh, this is. Right. You know, we've addressed the issue, we've acknowledged it, and then we forget about it 2 months later. Right. This needs to be ongoing, because the racism in Boston has been ongoing. Yeah. Also in the country, obviously, but Boston specifically has this reputation. You can't just take your foot off the gas. You've got to keep going. You've got to discuss it. Billboards, ad campaigns. You need to do something to specifically address the racism. Right. But what you can't do is say, well, there's steps being taken forward. Well, what steps? What steps are you doing to do for? I mean, tell me that this is what we're doing. This is still going 40, 50 years later with this kind of, with these kinds of racist statements, then that means they're not doing enough.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
If it's still happening, then there isn't enough being done. And acknowledgement is only the first step in a long line of things that need to happen. You mentioned education, so let's just say it out loud. We need critical race theory. We need to acknowledge that racism is real, that it is part of our history, that we as a society have specifically targeted individuals based on their skin color, based on their historical origin, and in order to
where do we need
it? Right? Well, we need that in
where
all
do we need it?
Levels.
Where do we need it?
I think
because that's been a politically charged word. Where do you think we need critical race theory?
It needs to be in schools. It does.
It does.
Sorry, I'm a teacher, and when I have conversations with kids, it matters. It's important, and I know for a fact that I have changed kids' minds for the better, right? They became more open-minded. They thought about something from a different perspective, and their first essay in my class and their last essay in my class were different because they were willing to think about something from a new perspective. So it absolutely has to happen in schools.
I will agree with that. And when you say critical race theory, a lot of times this is what frustrates me is I'm okay with a form of critical race theory taught in lower levels, because the rebuttal to that has always been, and it frustrates me, is, well, critical race theory, a defense. Critical race theory is only taught at the university level, which it is, but there are ways you can also teach a lesser form where kids can understand that race has affected America on a much lower level, like you did in education. So, but too many people run from the idea. No, we're not teaching critical race theory. Fine, teach something similar.
here is where they're not understanding. So when you're in education, you're K through 12, early years, wherever you are, you as a teacher, guess what? We're really good at our job. We're professionals. We know what we're doing. We teach what is accessible for the kids at their age. So guess what is as the simplest way to teach critical race theory to your first graders? The ugly duckling. Okay, let's start with the ugly duckling. This is somebody who's different. He's not accepted. Now he finds his family, and there was a system in place that discriminated because he's ugly, because he's different, right? And so we use these examples, and it depends on where you are in the system, right? And it depends on how are you defined, like to what extent are we teaching critical race theory, which you're pointing out, but it is as simple as acceptance and tolerance and the acknowledgement that privilege is not, I have something more. It's that I didn't have to experience some form of discrimination.
Well, I'm going to get what I mean by this is I think when you are teaching U.S. history, for example, or the beginnings, let's just say third or fourth grade, I think that's when it's first taught. Please just say George Washington owned 300 African Americans or 300 Africans. Right. He enslaved 300 people. Please say that the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence enslaved 600 people, Thomas including his own brother-in-law. Please say that. If you say that in the beginning, right, you're not going to get all this. If just say it. Just say it. I don't care what pushback you get. There's a way that you can say it. That's
you're simply acknowledging
that's just acknowledging the fact that it's affected the laws. There are ways that you can address racial issues that's age appropriate. There are ways you can do that. Stop pretending like we can't. Right. And Boston, that's one thing you can do. Right. You can start by doing that, and then hopefully you'll have adults that won't act like fucking idiots.
Well, that might be a stretch, but let us know what you think. Do you think that there are specific things Boston as a city can do? What about their sports arenas and the owners of the sporting teams? So tell us what you think.